What's up, guys, and welcome to the channel. This is Tyler Tote. Guys, on this channel we cover a wide range of topics, most of them around self-improvement, mindset, habits, how to be the best version of you, how to be a great father, a lot of these things that I'm very interested in. Today's going to be a little bit different. I came across this clip that I'll share with you here in a moment. It's from a really well-known political strategist who says the greatest threat to America right now are Christians and Christian nationalists. Now, that caught my eye as a man who identifies himself as a Christ follower and a Christian. That seems very strange because when I read my Bible and I study Jesus, that just makes me a kinder, better person. So I thought there's got to be something I'm missing here. So I spent a few hours, really dug in, got to know a lot of the characters of this story. I'll share a lot of my findings here, and I want to present both sides equally. Before we hop in, I do want to say I think faith is extremely personal. I never push mine on people. I got friends that are atheists. I got friends that are Muslim. I got friends that are Jewish. I got friends all over, and I think it's very important that we just meet people where they are. So I want to try and present both sides of this. I really did a deep dive in this, spent several hours studying what was said, who was said, why they said it, what their thoughts are, and I want to examine both sides. So let's hop in. So first off, this interview happened on Bill Maher. I'm actually kind of a Bill Maher fan myself. I like a lot of the stuff he puts out. I don't agree with him on a lot of topics, to be quite honest, but I think he's very open-minded. He's willing to change. On certain topics, I've seen him change, and I appreciate people like that don't just entrench. They get presented new evidence, and they think different things. So often I'll watch little clips of his show when he has interesting guests on. So in the show that I'm referencing, he had a guest on named James Carville. Now, who's James Carville, you might ask? James Carville is the former host of CNN's Crossfire. He's a political analyst, political strategist over the last few decades. But if you're anything like me, you probably know him from this awesome clip that I'm going to share, where I believe he shares one of the awesome cameos in one of the greatest films of all time.
Unfortunately, the captain of the university debate team had a scheduling conflict. Yeah, so we had to bring someone else in to fill in for this event. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the co-host of CNN's Crossfire, famed political consultant, the Ragin' Cajun, Mr. James Carville.
Thank you, Dean Pritchett. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here, sir.
He tackles Will Ferrell in the debate. Really great movie there, old school. So that's how I knew James Carville, to be honest. Now, he goes on to say on Bill Maher that newly elected Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, who I'm just going to be very clear with, I didn't really know. I don't follow a lot of politics until I did a lot of digging into this. Now, when Mike Johnson was elected, he started out his tenure by actually inviting a bunch of his colleagues to pray together. Routinely quotes the Bible and routinely talks about Jesus, and that's his faith, and that's the center part of his life. Seems like that angers a lot of people on the other side. I find that kind of weird because those are the people screaming tolerance the most. So you would think that they would tolerate his faith as well. We'll get into that a little bit later. So before we go any further, I want to share this clip, and this is exactly what he had to say.
So, Mike Johnson, he's from your home state of Louisiana, the Speaker of the House. I read today he wrote a foreword in a book that subscribes to conspiracy theories and homophobic insults. I thought, Mike Johnson wrote the foreword to the Bible? Do you think Mike Johnson can hold his party together now that he has taken the mantle?
First of all, I don't think he can hold his party together. Second of all, you're exactly right. Mike Johnson and what he believes is one of the greatest threats we have today to the United States. I promise you, I know these people.
Well, you're talking about Christian nationalism.
Absolutely.
Talking about this
is a bigger threat than Al-Qaeda to this country. And let me tell you something. They have Speaker of the House. They got probably at least 2 Supreme Court justices, maybe more. Right? Don't kid yourself. And people in the press have no idea who this guy is, how he was formed, what the threat is, and this is a fundamental threat to the United States. It is a fundamental. They don't believe in the Constitution. They'll tell you that. Mike Johnson himself says, "What is democracy but 2 wolves and a lamb having lunch?" That's what they really, really, really believe. And to say, "Oh, come on, man, that's just some crazy shit." No. They believe that, and they're coming, and they've been doing it forever. They're funded. They're relentless. And, they probably won't win for a while, but they might.
No,
And
you
if
just-
they do, the whole country blows a
You
gasket.
just have to look at that painting. I think it's a Kincaid painting that a lot of them like, where Jesus is handing the Constitution
Right,
to
sure.
Thomas Jefferson. I mean, if you can look at that and go, that's the way it probably happened.
I know it. I know
That
it
wasn't a
well.
photo?
That
wasn't
is,
a photo?
no.
So you heard it right there from the man's mouth. He says, the greatest threat to America is not terrorism. It's not anything else. It's Christians and Christian nationalists. Now, I can go ahead and off the top of my head name many things that I would say are a much graver threat than Christians to America. First being illegal immigration. We set a record a few days ago before I recorded this. They caught over 12,000 illegal immigrants crossing into our nation. We have 8,000 a day that are crossing over illegally. We have no idea who these people are, why they're coming. Are they from different countries? Are they terrorists? We don't really know. I believe that poses a pretty big threat. Also, have you ever noticed that the US has money all the time for endless foreign wars, but we don't have it to protect our own border? And I also want to make a distinction here before I move on to the next point that I am all for legal immigration. In fact, if I were running things, I would 10x our legal immigration. Let's bring in great people from all over that are hardworking, that want to better our country, that want to embrace our values, our society, our culture. I am all for that. I am not for people that we don't know coming in illegally, not paying taxes and doing all these things. So I think that's a big distinction. I think that gets conflated a lot when people argue these back and forth sides. Well, you're not for immigration, not for human rights. No, I'm way for immigration. I think the US is awesome because we're a melting pot. We bring the best and the brightest from all over the world. There's a reason people want to get into our great nation. We just need to have sovereignty and have a border. So I would say that's a much bigger threat. Another one off the top of my head is the national debt. We're about to hit $34 trillion. That's with a T, trillion dollars in national debt. What that means is over $92,000 every man, woman, and child, you, me, everybody that's going to watch this, owes that back. Now that's a scary thing, and our government just seems to keep printing and printing and printing. As I did a lot of digging on this and looked into what happens when a country owes that much money, you don't have to look that far back. In 2017, 2018, we saw Venezuela start to do what we're doing now. Print. All of a sudden, they couldn't print enough money. Hyperinflation starts to happen. And in 1 year, their dollar had a 65,000% reduction. That means if you had $65,000 in the bank and you say, well, I'm pretty comfortable, right? That'll get me something. Imagine that today for yourself. That might buy you a candy bar 1 year later. So I definitely see being $34 trillion in debt and no sign of that stopping anywhere in the future. That in fact just keeps to becoming more and more. There seems to be no solution for it. I think that is a much graver threat too. Third one off the top of my head, and this one I'm really passionate about, is obesity and our healthcare costs. Now, back in 2014, a decade ago, we spent 1.4, again, this is trillion with a T, on obesity-related illnesses that a lot of studies say could have 100% been avoided by lifestyle changes. No politician is talking about this. Nobody's talking about the fact that almost 3 out of 4, we're looking at 70% of adult Americans are overweight or obese. The average American is on 4 pills today, and this provides a lot of big strain on our healthcare, rising costs that just simply are not sustainable. Another one that comes to mind is fentanyl, and nobody's really talking about this today, but again, this kind of goes hand in hand with the border not being sovereign. We're seeing 200 deaths a day in the United States now from fentanyl overdoses. A couple weeks ago, I read a tragic story that an 18-month-old was crawling in an Airbnb and ingested fentanyl and died. This is just becoming more and more common. These drugs are getting in through the border, through these drug cartels coming, and nobody addresses it. In the last 4 years, we've had 250,000 deaths from fentanyl. But our government doesn't address that. And in fact, if you really look at it, they fought harder to stop ivermectin than they did fentanyl. Now, what's ivermectin? When COVID hit, these guys wanted to shut that down. Why? Because they couldn't get rich off ivermectin because it's very cheap. So they all of a sudden banned it, fought really hard to make sure you couldn't get it during COVID because some doctors came out and said it worked. I don't know, not a doctor, not sure if it did work, didn't work, but they fought very hard to censor and to make sure that that stuff wasn't available to people. I just wonder why they don't fight as hard for fentanyl when 250,000 Americans have died over the last 4 years from fentanyl overdoses. I could go on and on with this stuff, to be honest. I think our political polarization is a big threat, how people are just hating each other on both sides and we don't work together anymore. our corrupt media, our military seems to be getting weaker, and we have the lowest enrollment rates in decades. The woke pandemic that is now going on in our schools and universities that we're seeing, on and on and on. I believe all these things pose much, much greater risks than Christians. But I did want to take a look at the other side, and to be honest, I didn't even really know what a Christian nationalist meant. So I wanted to dig into Mike Johnson's record, look at some of the things he says, what he stands for, and really try and hit this other side to make sure I understood the full view of it. I will say what's pretty wild to me too about James Carville, Bill Maher, and some of these really mainstream guys. I would be willing to bet if Mike Johnson was a Muslim and he invited everyone to pray to Allah, no one would make a deal of it. I feel like they attack certain groups of people, but they won't touch other groups of people. And it's become pretty trendy to hop on the white Christian nationalist movement and attack a lot of those people. And look, as I dug into it and looked what a white Christian nationalist even means, yeah, some of them are pretty scary. They're pretty nuts. You can find some really crazy people on this idea on the far, far right. But guys, you can do that on the far, far left. If we go out to the fringe and we assume that all Christian white people think this way, that's where it gets really dangerous. And so, a guy wanting to pray in Congress, I don't see how that's an issue. I do think it's really important that we look at both sides, and we do acknowledge that, yeah, look, I have children that don't look like me. We've adopted. I see this hate and this weird white nationalist stuff pop up in my feed some days. It's a very small segment. I'd say it's 1 out of 1,000 comments. I think these people are never who they say they are online. They're always hiding behind a computer. I do think there's a very small segment of society that's like this, but I want to dig in and see if Mike Johnson really fit this. So as I researched him and looked a lot into him, his most common answer and a few controversial things did come up. I'll just be honest, I don't agree with the guy on certain things. That would be pretty unreasonable to think we're all going to agree on everything. But here's where he stands on a few issues that I think a lot of people hate. Immediately after a mass shooting, he came out and the very first thing he said, and this is about a year ago, was guns don't kill people. And he just really reiterated that stance. Now look, I agree with them 100%. I'm all for the Second Amendment. I'm all for people owning guns, having the right to protect themselves and bear arms. But I do think there's a time and place. And I also think as I read into this story, it kind of shows who's paying your bills. It's the gun lobby. So when things like this happen, I would always like to lead with compassion and empathy for the victims, talk about solutions, and not just come hammering my points of view on guns. I do think there's a time and a place to stand up for that. I think if anything we've learned from going through the last season of COVID, it's pretty awesome that America has guns and can stand up for themselves, and we don't really have to see some of the things that might have happened in other countries happening to us. But again, I do think there's a time and place, and I would be pretty critical of him for that. He also takes a lot of flack for his stance on gay marriage back in the day. Now, I haven't seen anything recently that he says. His most common answer when he's pressed about this is, I follow the Bible. I think that's a really reasonable and fine response. And I also think it's important to note context. He gets attacked for this a lot. But a lot of these things that they're pulling out are from 2 decades ago, 15 years ago. Do you know who else was against gay marriage very openly 2 decades ago? The Obamas. He very famously came out before he was running for his first term and said, no, marriage is a man and a woman. You can find this stuff. It's very easy to look up. So, I think it's okay for some people to fall on a certain spot 2 decades ago and grow and change. I think we should actually celebrate that and not just hold people to their past from 20 years ago, something you might said or some way you might have believed. If you judged me on my beliefs from 20 years ago, you'd be canceling me left and right. I think that goes for all of us. The one thing that I'm going to be super critical about him about, and this just happened a couple days ago, all over the media, I saw where he is working and fighting very hard behind the scenes to blur people's faces from the January 6th. And look, I'll be honest, I don't know about the January 6th stuff. I don't watch a ton of news on this stuff, but when I look into it, it's very hard to decipher what's going on here. I feel like there's some people that were very peaceful. There's some people that went there to cause mayhem. I personally believe that the people that were there peacefully to just say, hey, we feel like maybe this election was in question or whatever it is, nothing should happen to those people, but we should see the tapes. And if there are people there that are bashing out windows and breaking stuff and fighting police officers, we shouldn't be blurring their faces and protecting those people. Those people should pay a penalty. I think whatever side you're on, this goes the other way. We've seen the peaceful protests, right? These mostly peaceful protests as buildings are burning in the background. I don't think those people should be protected either. We saw Black Lives Matter and a lot of these things happen with George Floyd several years ago. I would venture a guess this was the same as the January 6th stuff. Probably 80-90% of the people that went to those protests were pretty peaceful and they just wanted to say, hey, this isn't right and something needs to be done. I think probably 80-90% of the people that went to the January 6th thing were probably just planning on showing up to protest and chant and do their thing. And then you got 10% bad on each side. So I wouldn't protect those 10%. It seems like he is fighting to do that, and that's something I definitely disagree with. Now, one thing I definitely want to hit here, and I think this is very important to note for anybody watching this, it's really, you got to be mindful of this. It was a tweet from Zuby, one of my favorite follows and one of my best buddies here in life. And his tweet was, any group you're trying to prove nowadays that they're oppressed, you can find evidence for it. So if we want to say Christians are just being attacked and they're being this and that, guys, let's be honest, man. We live in America. We're not. You know, we can look back a few hundred years ago. We can look at other parts of the world and say, yes, very much so. There's people still being killed for their faith, but not in America. If our biggest oppression is Mike Johnson praying and a bunch of media people attack him, that's okay. If the biggest oppression for me is tweeting about my faith and something like this happens, which happens pretty much every day, you're a Jesus freak, you're a this and this, that doesn't infringe upon my freedom. That doesn't even affect my day. I think if Mike Johnson truly believes and has a faith like I think he does, this stuff shouldn't affect him. He should continue to use the Bible as the guiding source, continue to grow his faith, be empathetic, try and meet people where they are. So I don't want to make this out like Christians are under attack or we need to do this or that. I think I could get way more clicks if I made that subtitle, I made that video, but that's the noise that's going on in our culture right now. Gay people are under attack. Trans people are under attack. Christians are under attack. Muslims are under attack. You can find evidence to support any of those things. We live in a big society where every day there are some of those fringe people that hate those groups and are going to go after them. But let's be honest, guys. I go outside and play every day with my kids. 9,999 people out of 10,000 that I encounter in real life, not online, are kind and they want about the same things I do. Whether we believe the same faith, whether our skin colors look alike, whatever that is, they probably just want to live a good life, raise their kids, live in peace, have a good life. That's most people. Again, we have fringy people on both sides and the media focuses only on them. But I don't think that's normal or common, and I don't think we need to buy into that lie that Christians are under attack or this or that. Now, having said that, I do think it's important to point out there's a definite good versus evil side here. I don't think if you're paying attention, you can ignore this fact now that we're seeing they're coming after children. They're coming after a lot of these things, right? Like in schools, we're seeing a lot of, you can't pray and the separation of church and state and all of these things kind of happening. So I think it's important to be mindful and to stand up for what you believe in. There very well may come a time, it's not today, where things do get worse. If you are a Christ follower like myself, the Bible kind of promises that. You're not going to live a super easy, cushy life if you follow me and you sell out and you go all in. That's what Jesus says. I'm okay with that. I think if you are a Jesus person and you're watching this, maybe it's good to take a look. This is why this caught my attention. The more I researched it, the more I looked into it, they just don't like the guy because he prays in the open and he talks about the Bible. They don't like that. There's a whole segment of people that don't like that. They want you to think that that's the greatest threat, that people like this guy and people like me or you, if you're a Christian, are trying to suppress other people's rights or we hate gay people or this or that. And the truth is, that's just not the way it is for 99% of us. Are there those fringe crazy people? Yes. After reading all about Mike Johnson and researching this guy a lot, do I think he's one of them? I don't even think he's close. I think he's a Christ follower that tries to follow the Bible, that tries to follow his conscience. And I think there's a lot of people that hate that. So I'd love to know what you guys think. Look, I spent a couple hours researching this and going back and forth. But to be honest, I'm very open with this. I don't follow politics a ton. So I'd love to know what you guys think in the comments. If you have any good articles you can link below or certain things, this is something I kind of want to stay on. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Love to hear what you think. Above all else, guys, I always end every video with just encouraging you to be kind to other people, be kind to yourself. Live an on-fire life, be the best version of you. That's how we're going to change the world. I don't think knowing all about national politics and getting really deep diving into a lot of this stuff is very prudent all the time. But when topics like this come up and I see a pretty prominent guy saying the biggest threat to our nation is Christians, that's going to perk up my attention and make me want to look into these things, which is why I'm putting out this video. We're better together, and again, I'd love your thoughts and I'd love your take on it, so let me know. And you guys go have the greatest day of your life. Thanks for tuning in.